Edinburgh, taken from the air circa 1920. The castle stands proud in the foreground. The extinct volcano called Arthur's Seat sits behind, and a daring RAF pilot flies his flimsy biplane in front of the dramatic clouds. This image is not what it seems. Keep watching and I will tell you more, and I will also let you in on a tenuous link I have to some of the images you're about to see. I've just come back from an exhibition on Alfred Buckham, and honestly I wasn't expecting just how intense his story would be. This is someone who didn't just take photographs from the air. This is someone who suffered life-changing injuries in a plane crash in 1918 and yet continued after the war to risk his life to take amazing aerial photographs and then completely reinvent them in the darkroom. And the more I read, the more I realised these images aren't just photographs. They're constructed composite compositions by a master photographer 60 plus years before the creation of Photoshop and 70 to 80 years before the term photoshopped entered the English language as a word to describe images that just seem too good, too fanciful, or just too odd to be true. This photographer was effectively photoshopping images in the darkroom in the 1920s and wowing the general public with his art at exhibitions. Alfred Buckham was born in 1879, and by the time the war broke out, he was already an experienced photographer and teacher. When he joined the Royal Naval Air Service in 1916, aged 37, he was initially training others in aerial photography. But very quickly, he pushed to be in the air himself. And this is where things get interesting, because when we hear aerial reconnaissance in the First World War, it's easy to picture views of the trenches, the Western Front, and cameras pointed down at battlefields. But that doesn't seem to be where Buckham was working. From what I've been able to find out from various sources, his role was much more closely tied to naval operations. He was based at Turnhouse near Edinburgh, but also worked with the Grand Fleet, even flying from early aircraft carriers like HMS Furious. So rather than photographing trenches, he was most likely flying over the North Sea, tracking ships, watching for coastal incursions, and carrying out reconnaissance that supported the British fleet. And that's a very different kind of danger. Cold, unpredictable weather, open water below you. Although he would not be under constant small arms fire or flak, flying was still incredibly risky, and it explains why he crashed 9 times during the war. There's one moment he describes after a crash. When I discovered myself again, I was head foremost in a particularly wicked bush, which was doing its best to indicate the intrusion was unwelcomed. But when I endeavoured to extricate myself, it became positively cantankerous, and what I called that bush, none but myself will ever know. It's almost humorous in the way he tells it, but the reality is, this was deadly work. The 9th crash, which actually happened not far from where I sit today, near Rosyth, changed his life completely. He lost his voice after a serious throat injury, resulting in the loss of his larynx. And for the rest of his life, he could only speak in a whisper and breathe through a tube in his neck. He was medically discharged in 1919 as being unable to speak. And yet, he kept flying and he kept taking photographs. I have to add that it is important to note that Buckham wasn't some kind of maverick doing things his way, though in some aspects, as we'll see next, he did. But during the First World War, Buckham became one of the Royal Naval Air Service's leading aerial reconnaissance photographers, helping to shape how photography was used from the air for years to come. Now this is the part that really stood out to me. Buckham didn't shoot from a comfortable seat. He flew in open cockpits. Sometimes he would literally stand up mid-flight to get the shot. Overall, Buckham's approach to flying and photography was, let's just say, unconventional. For one, he didn't like using safety belts. In fact, he said, "Providing the pilot knows what one is doing, it is quite unnecessary to wear a safety belt, which badly impedes movement, and the man with the joystick can always be relied upon to pass the word if he contemplates banking or diving the machine. It is not easy to tumble out of an airplane, unless you really want to. And on considerable more than 1,000 flights I have used a safety belt only once, and then that was thrust upon me. I always stand to make an exposure, and taking the precaution to tie my right leg to the seat, I am free to move rapidly and easily in any desired direction, and loop the loop and indulge in other delights with perfect safety." So imagine that, open cockpit, wind rushing past at speed, and he's standing up, taking a photograph. You may ask why. A casual look at images from the time shows seated photographers, and some with cameras bolted to their airframe, but not Alfred, the professional photographer. He insisted on standing so that the negative, a glass plate, would not be spoiled by the vibrations of the aeroplane. He did note, though, "It is an alarming experience for a beginner to find himself lolling over the side of an aeroplane while the landscape climbs up to the sky and the horizon loses its horizontality and endeavours to become vertical." And he wasn't always flying in calm conditions either. He actively preferred dramatic weather. He stated, "Stormy days provide the most opportunities for picture making." And it's interesting, even today, landscape photographers will tell you exactly the same thing. The best light often comes just after the rain. And that's true. He also admitted something very human about it. "Some of the effects are so exquisitely beautiful, one almost forgets to use the camera." Out with his duties, and especially after the war, Buckham wasn't chasing documentation, he was chasing drama. He was heavily inspired by the painter J.M.W. Turner, someone known for capturing light and atmosphere and powerful skies. At an early point in his artistic career, Alfred abandoned painting entirely. He ceremonially burned his own sketches after comparing his work to Turner. In his photographic creations, you can see that influence of Turner in his work. He captured storms, light breaking through clouds, and almost theatrical compositions. He even gave his photographs poetic titles like "Where Lightnings Lurk." Despite his bonfire of sketches, he didn't stop being an artist. He just changed his tools. So as I alluded to earlier, Buckham's photographs are not what they seem. What looks like a single moment captured in the air is often built from multiple images. After the war, he began experimenting with composite photography, taking different negatives of landscape, sky, and aircraft, and combining them into one final image. This wasn't entirely new, as exposing for the land and sky required different timings, and photographers had long since realised they needed to blend two images of the same scene together to get a good, even exposure across the image. But Buckham took it much further. He built what was essentially a cloud library of over 2,000 sky negatives to select from and be used with whichever landscape he had to work with. He would sometimes go through dozens of cloud negatives just to find the right one. And he was very clear about how important this was. The lighting of the landscape must be in correct relation to the light from the sky. As he says, if you got that wrong, the whole image fell apart. And once he had them together, he'd blend them manually in the darkroom, dodging, burning, adjusting by hand, even adding or removing detail using paint, ink and chalk. Buckham wasn't trying to deceive people, he was trying to create emotion. One of the most fascinating examples is his photograph of Edinburgh. At first glance, it looks like a single aerial shot, a plane flying over the castle. but it's actually made from 3 separate negatives: the city, the sky, the aeroplane. And that aeroplane, it wasn't even photographed in the air. It was taken on the ground, masked out, scaled, and then inserted into the scene. Not only that, but this plane appears in several of his images, but for this one it was flipped to create a better composition. He even painted over details like the dents at the bottom of the wheels that would indicate it was on the ground, just to make it look like the aircraft was in flight. He never made changes to the glass plate negative. His adjustments and refinements were made on the paper after developing. He could add ink to darken, chalk to lighten. He even scratched away the surface to create highlights or the look of a moving propeller. So what you're seeing is not a captured moment, it's a constructed one. Back when I was in high school, I dabbled in this dark art. I had an image taken from the art room on the upper floor looking over the science block towards the local railway station, and I also had an image of an RAF Mosquito taken at an air show a few months earlier. I blended them together rather poorly, as you can see, but I still managed to fool my young friends at the time, who became quite annoyed that they'd missed the mosquito fly past our school. Now this is where the whole story becomes personal for me. My very tenuous link. Buckham photographed the Forth Bridge many times, and these images really stood out for me because the landscape he captured is where I grew up. In his photographs you're looking across open countryside towards the bridge, but today that area is now expanded town of Queensferry, and right there in the image is Queensferry Primary School, my first school, and quite possibly the same school my grandparents went to in the early 1900s. So suddenly, this isn't just history, it's a place I know, a place I've lived and loved, just seen from a completely different perspective and time. So, in 1931, Buckham took on an extraordinary journey, a 15-week aerial expedition across South America covering around 19,000 miles. He photographed everything from volcanoes to ancient ruins, often under extreme and dangerous conditions. Eventually he made his way back via Texas, where on arrival in Texas he was officially described as a perfect specimen but deprived of speech, which he noted in his journal as making the whole trip worthwhile to be described as in an official document as being a perfect physical specimen. After this last hurrah, he settled into a quieter life. Alfred Buckham died in Brighton, England, in 1956 at the age of 76. What really stayed with me after seeing this exhibition is that Buckham wasn't limited by his circumstances, not by technology, not by danger, not even by losing his voice. He found a way to create something completely unique, and maybe that's the takeaway here. Photography has never just been about capturing reality, it's about interpreting it, and Buckham was doing that long before we had the tools we rely on today. Later, if you wish, I can take a closer look at one of those images in detail and break down exactly how it was constructed. If that sounds interesting, let me know. Meanwhile, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.